She was the prize in a dangerous bet now. A human claims the alien girl. The arena was filled with noise, glowing lights, and the smell of blood. Creatures from all over the galaxy shouted, drank, and placed bets. It was the final match of the season, and tonight's prize was no normal treasure. Inside a small cage at the edge of the arena sat a girl, silver-skinned, beautiful, and silent. She didn't speak, didn't cry, only stared through the bars as if her soul had left her body. She was the daughter of a noble alien house, but her people had lost a war as punishment. She had been handed over as property for the final fight. Whoever won would own her forever. Her name was Syra, and she had once been proud and powerful, now chained and dressed like a showpiece. She waited for her fate. Everyone expected Gornak the Crusher to win. He was 7 feet tall, with 4 arms and razor-sharp tusks. He had never lost a match. Not once. The announcer's voice echoed across the arena. Tonight's prize is rare. A highborn female of the Viren caste. The fighter who wins shall take her. The crowd roared. Drinks spilled, and bets were placed at lightning speed. Gornak stepped into the arena, his body covered in black armor and glowing tattoos. The ground shook with every step he took. He raised his axe and pointed it toward Syra's cage. She's mine, he shouted. The crowd screamed his name, expecting a quick, brutal fight. Then, something strange happened. Another gate opened, but no one had ordered it. Out of the shadows walked a human, tall, quiet, unarmed, wearing only a long coat and boots. The crowd laughed. The announcer looked confused. Who is this? No registration, no sponsor, no weapons. The voice rang out. I'll fight, the human said calmly. His voice was not loud, but it carried through the silence that followed. The officials hesitated, but the arena master, an old Kragan beast, grinned and waved his hand. Let him die. It'll be good entertainment, he said. Syra looked up from her cage for the first time. She had seen many fighters, many monsters, but this was just a human. No sharp claws, no armor, nothing special. She shook her head, whispered under her breath, please, not him. An old drunk alien next to the betting table laughed and threw 1 credit down. Put it on the human, just for fun, he said. The others mocked him. You're throwing your money away. The horn blew, and the match began. Gornak charged with a roar, swinging his massive axe toward the human's chest. But in one smooth motion, the human rolled forward, fast. Like a shadow, the axe hit the ground with a loud crash. Missing its target, the crowd gasped. The human stood back up, fists clenched, no fear in his eyes. Gornak roared again, swinging his weapon wildly. But the human dodged again, then again, dancing between the monster's attacks like wind. He's fast, someone whispered. Too fast, another added. Then the human struck. A hard kick to the side of Gornik's knee. A punch to the throat. Gornik stumbled, surprised, blood spraying from his mouth. The human didn't stop. He moved like lightning strike after strike. Fast, clean, and brutal. Gornak screamed, swinging his axe in rage, but the human leaped over him and landed on his back. In a second, he wrapped a chain around the warlord's throat. Pulling tight, Gornak fell to one knee, then the other. His eyes bulged. His arms clawed at the chain, and then, silence. Gornak collapsed, face first in the sand, not moving, not breathing. The crowd sat frozen, shocked. The announcer finally stuttered. Gornak is defeated. The human wins. Some aliens began to cheer. Others booed. Many couldn't believe what they had seen. The human walked over to Syra's cage. The guards opened it, laughing. She's yours now, human, they said. Claim your prize. Syra stood, but didn't move toward him. She expected him to grab her, touch her, command her. Instead, he looked into her eyes and said softly, I'm not here to hurt you. She blinked, unsure what to say. He took off his coat and placed it around her shoulders. Her eyes widened, Her own people had stripped her of honor, but this human was giving her dignity. He reached out not to chain her, but to help her walk. She hesitated, then took his hand. The arena lights still flashed. The crowd still screamed, but for Syra, the world had changed in one moment. The human had not come to win a prize. He had come to set something right, and the galaxy had no idea what was about to begin. The journey out of the arena was silent, but heavy with eyes. Syra walked beside the human, wrapped in his coat, her bare feet touching the cold metal floor. Guards didn't stop them. They just watched, whispering among themselves. Some laughed, others looked confused, a few looked angry. She wasn't sure which reaction scared her more. She expected him to drag her, to show her off, to gloat. But he didn't even look at her like she was a prize. He walked like he had simply done what needed to be done. His name, she would later learn, was Mason. He didn't speak until they reached the docks. The ship wasn't big, not a warrior's ship or a noble's cruiser. It was old, patched, and quiet. The kind of ship forgotten in most ports, yet fast enough to disappear. He opened the ramp and gestured inside. She stopped at the bottom, her legs shaking. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her like no one else had before. "Do you want to come inside, or go back to them?" he asked. No threats, no chains, just a choice. Her whole life had been made of orders and commands. Now this human, who legally owned her under galactic law, was asking her what she wanted. Her knees almost gave out. Her pride screamed to walk away, but her fear held her in place. She stepped forward slowly. Past the threshold, the door hissed closed. Behind her, locking out the galaxy. Inside, it was warm, dim, and quiet. The hum of the ship was soft, almost comforting. Mason walked to a small cabinet and pulled out a folded blanket and a bottle of water. He placed them on a seat, then nodded toward it. "Sit if you want. You don't owe me anything." Her fingers trembled as she reached for the water. The moment it touched her lips, her throat burned with need. She didn't realize how thirsty she'd been. She finished the bottle and looked down, ashamed of how desperate she must have looked. "Why did you do it?" she asked, voice hoarse. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Because no one else would." She frowned. "But you own me now." "No," he replied. "They might say I do, but I don't believe people can be owned." She stared at him, unsure if this was a trick, a game, or some deeper cruelty she didn't yet understand. Many aliens played kindness before showing their true nature. He gave her a room, not a cell, not a storage corner, but a real room, with a bed and a closed door. She stood at the doorway for minutes before finally stepping inside. She sat on the bed, still unsure if she was safe, or just between punishments. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat curled in the corner, watching the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for chains, commands, or worse. But it never opened. Hours passed, and nothing happened. She couldn't understand it. Why wouldn't he claim his reward? Why was he different? In the morning, or what the ship's lights considered morning, she found food placed outside her door, warm and untouched. No cameras, no guards, no locks on her door. She walked to the control room and found him working on the nav console, eyes focused, hands calm. He turned, nodded. "We're heading toward a neutral zone. Once we get there, you can choose where to go. I'll help you disappear." "You don't want anything?" she asked. "No," he said simply. She didn't believe him, not yet. She'd been trained not to. She'd been raised in a house where everything had a cost, even kindness. Still, something inside hers, something small and broken, wanted to believe, just this once, that he was telling the truth. The galaxy had many monsters. She had seen them all, but this human, who had fought like a beast, now sat quietly, like a man who didn't want to be a hero, and that made her more confused than anything else. because for the first time since she was captured, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like a person again, and that was more dangerous than any cage, because hope was harder to escape than chains. Syra didn't understand this new kind of silence. It wasn't cold or cruel like the cages she'd known before. It was calm, heavy, but not suffocating. Each hour that passed aboard the human ship made her question everything she believed about his kind, and even about herself. She explored slowly, carefully, always watching for traps that never came. The door to her room stayed unlocked. The food kept appearing warm, fresh, never drugged. The clothes were clean, soft, not designed to humiliate or mark her as property. She found him fixing a damaged console in the engine room, sparks flying near his face. He looked like someone who should belong in the background of life, not the center of a galactic scandal. And yet, he had won her from an arena. No one thought he'd survive. "You don't know what I am," she said, voice barely above the noise of the tools. He glanced over, wiping oil from his hands. "No, but I know what you're not." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "And what am I not?" "You're not mine." That word again, that idea. It was spreading like a crack through the walls around her heart. No one had ever said that to her before. Not her enemies, not her people, not even her family. That night, Syra stood in front of the mirror in her new clothes, staring at her reflection. She looked strange. Not like the noble she used to be, not like the slave they'd forced her to become, but something in between, something unfinished. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, bare feet touching the metal floor. Her heart pounded harder than it ever had in the arena. Mason sat in the pilot's seat, eyes watching the stars beyond the screen, hands calm on the controls. "Why didn't you take me?" she asked suddenly. The words escaped before she could stop them, not just from her lips, but from some deep, wounded place inside her. He didn't turn around. He didn't jump or react. He just sighed. "Because I'm not like them." She stepped closer, unsure if she wanted to hit him or cry in front of him. "You could have done anything to me, by law, by force, and no one would stop you." "I would stop me," he said. "You fought for me," she whispered. "You risked death. You risked everything. And now? You don't even look at me the way others did." He looked at her then. Really looked at her, not at her body, not at her scars, not at her bloodline, but at her, as if she was a real person. Maybe even someone worth knowing. "You were chained when I found you," he said, "and I've seen enough chains for one lifetime." She stood in silence, heart aching from emotions she had never been allowed to feel before. Gratitude, fear, confusion, hope, all swirling like a storm inside her chest. She didn't know what she was to him, but for the first time in so long, she knew what she wasn't. She wasn't a thing. Not to him. That night, she didn't return to her room. She sat outside the cockpit, curled up on the floor, just listening to the soft hum of the ship and the breathing of the strange human who refused to treat her like anything less than free. She didn't speak, he didn't ask, but somehow, without words, they understood something that couldn't be explained by laws, species, or history. The galaxy had called her a prize, but here, in the quiet of a ship moving between stars, she felt more like a person than she ever had before, and maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of freedom. Syra stood on the observation deck, staring into the endless stars. Her hands gripped the rail. Her reflection, faint in the glass eyes that once belonged to nobility, now carried a silence even the stars couldn't erase. Behind her, the ship hummed like a distant memory, soft and steady, but her thoughts were not. In her culture, bloodlines were sacred. Her caste was once high and touchable, revered, born to command fleets and courts. Yet here she was, barefoot on a human's ship, her robes replaced by a simple shirt and loose pants. The old her would have screamed, fought, maybe ended her own life for what had happened in the arena. A human had touched her, carried her, claimed her before thousands. According to the ancient laws of her people, she was no longer pure. She was tainted, a disgrace, an echo of ruined honor. She had expected judgment from Mason, or at least confusion, but he didn't seem to care about caste, blood, or any of the chains her people wrapped around themselves. That confused her most of all. He walked into the room holding a mug of something warm. He placed it beside her without a word and leaned against the wall. Watching her in silence, she didn't look at him, but she knew he was there, like a quiet force that refused to push or pull. My people would kill me, she finally said, not because I was taken, but because I wasn't used and discarded. I know, he replied. She turned slowly. Then why aren't you afraid of me? I'm not afraid of broken rules, he said. Only broken people who never learn how to heal. She let that sit in the air for a while. Longer than she should have. It sounded like something foolish and wise all at once, like the kind of thing a war survivor might say, when they've seen too much and survived anyway. I don't belong anywhere anymore, she said. I can't go back. And I don't know how to go forward. You don't have to know right now, he said. You just have to keep breathing. That's enough. He wasn't like other beings. She'd been around generals, scientists, and merchant screechers who calculated everything. But Mason didn't ask her for anything, didn't even seem to want her gratitude. It made her feel something dangerous, safe. Later that evening, she stood in front of the mirror again, holding a blade she had hidden in her robes long ago, a small ceremonial knife, sharp enough to pierce the skin, just enough to make a scar. One cut could return her honor, even if no one saw it. One drop of blood could make her feel like she controlled her fate again. She raised it to her arm. The door opened. Mason didn't say anything. He didn't panic, didn't yell. He just walked up to her, slowly, like approaching a wild animal ready to run. Don't, he said gently. You're not lost, just waiting to be found. Tears burned in her eyes before she realized they were there. She dropped the blade, and it hit the floor with a soft clink. He knelt, picked it up, and without a word, placed it on a shelf. Then he stepped back, giving her space, not touching her, not judging. I was never meant to be someone's property, she whispered. You never were, he said. She walked past him and out of the room, barefoot and shaking. But for the first time since she was taken, she didn't feel invisible, and though she wouldn't say it out loud, a small voice inside her whispered something she didn't dare believe yet. Maybe she didn't have to go back to who she was. Maybe she could become something else entirely. Maybe she already had. The message reached the outer colonies within hours, bouncing between satellites and star hubs like a wildfire through dry grass. Noble-blooded Viren girl, claimed by human, it read, followed by a blurry image of Syra standing beside Mason. In the arena, her silver skin wrapped in his coat, eyes downcast, hands unchained. At first, many thought it was a fake, a prank to mock the elite houses. But then came the official seal of the arena lords, and the confirmation from the Galactic registry. Her name, Sira von Elther, was no longer listed under House Tar. It was now tagged as acquired by Combat Human Victor. Mason Ride, her people reacted with rage. Her father, a powerful exile in the Black Crescent Zone, declared her dead and offered a bounty not just on the human, but on his entire bloodline. The bounty was high enough to tempt assassins, hunters, and even broken soldiers who had nothing left to lose. Inside the ship, Syra sat on the floor of the engineering bay, tools scattered around her. She'd asked Mason to teach her how to fix the coolant lines, and he didn't say no. That was becoming a pattern with him. He never pushed, never rejected, just made space for her to exist. She was wiping oil from her fingers when a quiet chime echoed through the room. Mason entered with a data pad, his face unreadable. You should see this, he said, handing it over. Syra read the words slowly, her hands trembling by the second line. She scrolled down, and there it was, her face on a wanted notice, with numbers that made her sick. I'm worth that much? She asked. trying to sound amused, but her voice cracked instead. "They want to make an example of you," Mason replied, "and scare anyone else who dares to be free." Syra laughed, hollow and sharp. "They're scared of one girl and one human with a junk ship." "No," he said. "They're scared because you're not theirs anymore." She looked up at him, eyes flashing with something new. "And what are you afraid of?" He thought for a moment, then answered honestly, "Failing you." That stopped her completely. No one had ever said something like that to her before, not even when she was draped in gold and seated in halls of power. Her worth had always been tied to what she could offer: her name, her blood, her body. But now, someone feared letting her down. Outside the ship, the galaxy shifted. Bounty hunters picked up their weapons, warlords made quiet calls, and old enemies began to move. But inside the ship, Syra sat beside the human who never asked to own her, and yet risked everything to protect her. They moved from system to system, always staying a few jumps ahead. Mason taught her to fly, to repair, to speak codes in human trade dialects. She no longer felt like a passenger. She was becoming a part of the ship, a part of the journey. But it wasn't until the third ambush that she realized how much she had changed. A mercenary squad intercepted them near the gas rings of Yarrow 6. Heavy cannons and boarding hooks ready, they hailed the ship, calling her by her full title, demanding her surrender in the name of blood and honor. Syra stepped forward, pushed Mason aside, and answered herself. "This is Saravan Althor," she said into the comms, "and I belong to no one now." The mercenaries didn't expect her voice, didn't expect her pride. They hesitated, long enough for Mason to fire the first shot, long enough for Syra to launch the decoy drones, long enough to escape. As the stars stretched again and the ship jumped to safety, Mason looked over and smiled. "You didn't freeze." Syra wiped sweat from her brow and whispered, "I'm tired of being hunted." "Mason," he nodded, "then let's stop running." She stared at him, her heart thudding. "What do you mean?" He set the course, eyes locked ahead. "Let's find a place they can't reach, where you're not a prize, not a property, not a mistake. Just you." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she quietly replied, "And what if I want to stay with you?" He turned slowly, unsure if he heard her right. She didn't repeat it, but she didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything. And for the first time, Syra smiled, not like a survivor, but like someone who was finally living. The ship landed in a quiet region of the outer reach, on a moon so small and forgotten, it didn't even have a name on the star charts. The sky above was painted with a cracked purple hue, and the wind hummed low across the dusty plains. There were no cities here, no hunters, no nobility, just silence and stars, the kind of place someone could disappear if they wanted to. Mason had found it through an old smuggler's network safe, hidden, ignored by law and crime alike. Syra stepped off the ramp barefoot, feeling the ground beneath her for the first time in weeks. It was dry and rough, but real, and for some reason, it made her heart beat faster. They had arrived with no ceremony, no plan, just the weight of everything they had run from. Still, clinging to their skin, Mason carried the last of the supplies out of the ship, set down a crate of rations, and looked around. "There's an old shelter nearby, pre-fall tech. Still stable," he said quietly. Syra nodded, though she barely heard him. Her thoughts weren't on the shelter, or the food, or the equipment. They were on him, this human who had fought to win her, only to spend every moment after trying to give her back her freedom. She watched him kneel and check a damaged solar panel, his fingers moving with calm skill. She didn't know how to say it out loud, what had been building in her chest like quiet thunder, but the longer she stayed near him, the harder it became to ignore. That night, the two of them sat by a small fire just outside the shelter, stars spinning slowly above. Mason sipped from a dented flask and offered it to her. She took it, tasted the burn, and winced. "Still not used to that?" he asked, with a small grin. "I don't think I'll ever get used to half the things you humans do," she said, setting it down. Yeah, well, he leaned back, staring at the fire. We're a strange bunch. Silence returned between them, but it wasn't the awkward kind anymore. It was familiar now, comfortable, like space left for something deeper to form. Mason, she said softly, her voice catching in her throat. Why do you care what happens to me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he threw a stick into the fire and watched the sparks float upward like little burning stars. Because someone should, he finally said. Because maybe. I've lost too many I didn't protect in time. Syra's fingers curled around her knees, her voice barely a whisper. I wasn't supposed to feel anything again. I told myself I would shut everything off, just to survive. But you didn't, he said. You kept feeling anyway. She turned to look at him, eyes wet, lips trembling. I don't know what I'm supposed to be now. He leaned forward, voice low. Be whoever you want. You don't have to fit their rules anymore. Her hand brushed his by accident, and she didn't pull away. Neither did he. For a long moment, they just sat like that, barely touching, barely breathing, as if the stars themselves had paused to listen. You know, she said, a quiet smile forming. If I went back to my people right now, they'd probably say I've been corrupted. He chuckled. Good, maybe we're both corrupted. She laughed too, the sound surprising even herself. It had been so long since she'd felt safe enough to laugh, so long since she'd felt anything and let it show. Later that night, as she lay in the cot inside the shelter, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of engine oil and dust, she whispered into the dark, Mason. He stirred in the corner, still awake. Yeah. If I asked you not to leave me behind, would you stay? There was no hesitation in his reply, just quiet, certain truth. I already have. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since her world had fallen apart, sleep came without fear, without shame, just a small warmth in her chest where something like trust had finally taken root. The sun on the nameless moon rose slowly, its light soft and pale, like it had traveled 1,000 lifetimes to get here. Syra stood at the edge of the ridge, hair blowing gently in the cold breeze. Mason stood a few feet behind her, silent, not wanting to disturb the moment, but somehow knowing this one mattered. They had lived quietly for weeks now, fixing the shelter, hunting for food, avoiding every signal trace that might give them away. The galaxy had gone on spinning wars politics, trade routes shifting, but here, between the rocks and stars, it all felt like a different universe. A smaller, safer one. That morning, Syra wore no cloak, no symbols of caste, not even shoes. She was as free as the wind that passed over the cliffs. And Mason, for the first time, didn't see a girl who had once been a prize in a bet. He saw someone who had burned through pain and come out alive. I had a dream last night, she said without turning. I was back in the arena, chained, but this time, no one came. I just waited, and waited. Mason stepped closer, his voice gentle. But you woke up. Yes, she nodded. And you were here. She turned to face him, and something in her expression had changed. It wasn't just trust. It wasn't just survival. It was choice. Something she'd never had before. Someone she had never been allowed to be before. I don't want to run anymore, she said. Not from them, not from who I was, and not from what I feel. He didn't move, just listened, letting her speak at her own pace, letting her be heard. You didn't just save me, she continued. You gave me back the right to decide. And now, I've decided something. She walked to him, stopped just a breath away, eyes locked on his. I want to stay, not because I owe you, or because I'm hiding, but because I want us to mean something. Mason's voice was low, a little rough. Syra, are you sure? You don't have to choose me just because I'm not choosing out of gratitude, she interrupted softly. I'm choosing because I've never felt more real than I do with you. There was no grand kiss, no dramatic music in the air, just a simple, quiet closeness as she rested her forehead against his chest and let herself breathe. his arms wrapped around her slowly, and for the first time, neither of them was carrying the other. They were standing together. That evening, the bounty on her name expired. Quietly removed from the galactic net, rumors said the Viren house had collapsed from within, broken by power struggles and shame. No one came looking for her again. No one dared, but the girl who had once been a prize no longer cared about thrones or bloodlines. She helped Mason rebuild the ship, painted the walls of the shelter with patterns from her childhood, danced barefoot in the rain of sulfur storms, and when Mason introduced her to a wandering trader as his partner, she didn't flinch or correct him. Because she wasn't someone's property anymore, she was someone's choice. And more importantly, she had chosen back. In a galaxy full of chains and power and noise, they had found something rare, a quiet place, a shared purpose, and love, built not on ownership or survival, but on freedom.